All right, I think I may be starting 30 seconds early, but with the delay, one never knows. So, welcome to Sight Reading Maverick. This is, I think, the 31st episode, or 31st or 32nd. I think it might be 31st. And so I wanted to celebrate getting into the 30s by inviting a special guest today who I will introduce in a few moments. But for those that don't know about my show, I basically just sight read for an hour and people send in requests and there you go. And I sight read them. And I do give some explanation about what I'm looking at before I start. When I'm done, I sometimes give some remarks about what happened and what didn't happen. So that's the show. The first request today, oh, and I should say the links to the scores are down below. So go ahead and if you want to follow along, just click on the link to IMSLP. If for some reason it doesn't click you through, it means, who knows, it might be an issue with public domain. But I try to do all public domain stuff. All right, first request, and I see Louis and Richard are both here. Hello. Richard, it is kind of depressing. Richard said that the title of the Chaminade piece is depressing. Oh well, we didn't name it, Richard. All right, first up, Rigaudon by Jean-Philippe Rameau. And this is, I think I already said, a request of Louis. And so it's 2 pages long, starts off in G major. The trio is going to be in G minor. Looks very contrasty. The trio is quite different. The first part is all staccato, second part is all legato. Let's see what else. Actually, the left hand has quite a bit of busy work in this one. So I'm kind of glancing to see what it is. It's basically scalar, so that's nice and comforting. So it's scalar at first, and then it does get a little bit triady. That's a word. The second half, in the second half of the first section, the left hand goes up to treble clef. Actually, it does that several times throughout, so I really need to be paying attention. There's some weird repeats in here, actually. I'm noticing that and noting that. And then at the end of the trio only has 2 sections, then it goes back to the beginning. Fastest note value, 8th notes. Okay. So what am I going to do? 1, 2, 1, 2. And there we go. So that was Jean-Philippe Rameau's Rigaudon. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was really fun and kind of surprising to me. So, oh, and I turned the page the wrong way, which is always extra thrilling to do. But anyway, all right. I want to now take a moment to invite my special guest on. And so, Dr. Tracy Cowden, let's see if you're going to show up here. Yes, she's there. All right. I was looking at the YouTube version, which is delayed. So, Tracy, welcome to my little show. And I have to say an extra thanks because I know sight reading on the spot while people are watching is not exactly the most, I don't know, not everybody's favorite pastime. So welcome.
Thank you.
Now, yeah. Now, let's see. Do you want to go ahead and do your piece and then we can chat afterwards?
Sure.
Okay. So I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, she's muted. She is muted. Okay, so I chose this little Chaminade piece, which is, the title translates as Lullaby of the Little Blessed Soldier. And I'm really curious what the story is behind that, but I don't know. So the piece has underneath the tempo marking, which is andantino, it says, this piece must be played with a hazy and veiled sonority. So that's what I'm going to be going for, hazy and veiled. And as I look at it, what I notice the most is it's in A major. It seems pretty straightforward harmonically in terms of the way it's laid out. The right hand is a combination of melody and the chords underneath it. So I'll be trying to think about voicing even as I'm sight reading it. And then looking ahead, what I see that is the most challenging is register shifts in the left hand. The left hand often goes back and forth between the bass clef and the treble clef, like very quickly because of the range. So it's pretty rangy, which will make it challenging to sight read. And there are also lots of accidentals as it starts to move into different harmonies. So that will be a challenge. It looks like the piece is in kind of a ternary form. There's a little middle section in C major, which has these little figurations in tiny notes. So that will be interesting to read, but they're all triadically based, so that's not too bad. And then it goes back to a version of the A section that has kind of parts of the B section woven into it. So I will be trying to make sure that I don't go too fast so that I can try and be as accurate as possible with all of those little gestures. So here is the Lullaby of the Little Blessed Soldier.
very different piece. I mean,
Yeah.
you kind of get the opposite ends of the piano, which was interesting. Those really low A's just have, I mean, they're almost so low that it gives a different sound altogether.
Yeah, a little ominous or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
It was, and I didn't quite nail all the register changes, but it was interesting to, it was unexpected, even though things didn't look that odd in terms of just like an isolated chord. The way it fit in the texture was not what I was expecting always. So.
Right, and that can always catch us off guard when we're sight reading, and you almost have to like turn off that, like, what was that part of your brain, right?
Very much, yeah. That's very true.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was absolutely gorgeous. Richard, who's watching, said that he thinks the title means it's actually the lullaby for the wounded warrior or wounded soldier.
It's wounded, of course. Yes.
Yeah. So, anyway.
That's even more sad. Okay. I forgot that blessé is wounded.
So, sorry, it's kind of a bad week, I suppose, to have that piece in, but I mean, it is what it is. And it was beautifully played, so thank you. So I want to ask you a couple questions here. I'm going to start with one, and then we'll do a little bit more music making. Then I'll ask you another. What would you say, if you had a student sitting in front of you right now, what are the most important things for a student to develop in order to be a good sight reader? Or what are some strategies?
I would say when you're like two main things. I think when you're actually sight reading, it's the discipline to go slow enough that you can truly read ahead and you know, kind of like find that sweet spot between challenging yourself too much or being too easy. But you got to find that sweet spot. But you have to have the discipline to not stop. Otherwise, you're not sight reading. You're practicing. That's what I always say. And then the other thing away from sight reading that I would say is that you have to develop really good fingering habits, because those are what gets you through when you're actually sight reading. So if you have those really good fingering habits, then they become automatic. And when you see patterns, you're not having to think about, like, how would I finger that pattern? Your fingers will just do it automatically.
Absolutely. And how would you suggest, I mean, I know this is a huge question, but how would you suggest people develop that? Because I think so often, you know, when you're a student, you get an edition that has fingerings in it already, right? Mm-hmm. So how does one develop their own sense of fingering?
I think part of it is being aware of the fingering that's in there and maybe questioning it, and sometimes changing it when it doesn't fit your hand very well. But always being aware, or I guess in the back of your mind asking yourself why they would do a fingering that way. So with my own students, sometimes I would do that. You know, I would kind of go through and say, why do you think that fingering was written that way? Especially if they weren't doing it initially. I'd be like, take a look at that fingering. Now tell me why you think they did that fingering that way. But I also think, I mean, I did a fair amount of technique exercises growing up, like Czerny and things like that. And I think those helped me develop really good fingering habits, because you can't move around that classical filigree kind of repertoire without having good fingering habits. So that was probably a big part of it. So I'm you know, pretty much a believer in scales and arpeggios and things like that to learn those kinds of fingering habits. But I'm definitely not a fan of like free-for-all fingering, and I would get after my students, you know, if they had bad fingering habits, because I do think that that's a real key to being able to learn music quickly and obviously sight read.
Absolutely, and I think that that's a neglected topic a lot when people talk about sight reading. But it's so true. If you're constantly in an awkward spot, you're not only trying to look what's coming ahead, but you have to reorient your hand or that type of thing. So I think that's a really good thing that you brought up. I find also that one of the things I find most difficult to deal with students who are sight reading is encouraging them to not necessarily play all the notes. Where do you stand on that? I mean, are you the type that would say, no, you really want to try to read all the notes? Or do you encourage them to let go of notes when they're sight reading?
It actually depends on what the music is. So if they were sight reading something like this, I probably would tell them to let go of some of the notes, because the moving around in the left hand in particular was really challenging. But if it's anything that's an orchestral reduction or an arrangement of something, I would definitely encourage them to, and that's a really, really hard skill. Once you get somebody trained to like read everything, then it's a really hard skill to get them to unlearn that and not read everything. But I would say, certainly if it's any kind of repertoire that's from an orchestral edition, like an aria or a concerto reduction or something like that, for more difficult things, I would definitely say to leave out more of the notes. I'm probably more of a purist, though, in that I would really only want people sight reading things that are within their grasp, like a level or two below where their repertoire is, so that they could play it more accurately. Because I feel like psychologically they're going to be in a better place if they can really be successful with it, rather than leaving so much out of it. So, like, you and I don't have that problem psychologically. We could leave some stuff out, and it's not gonna ruin our motivation to sight read. But for somebody who feels that they're not good at sight reading, I want them to be successful. So I just kept going like easier and easier with the stuff I would put in front of my students to give them that confidence.
I think that's another really good point that I hadn't thought of. So thank you for bringing that up. Good. Do you want to do the next piece?
Sure.
Okay. And before we go on, I also just want to say how I know Tracy. So, we went to school together at Eastman, and then we ended up, you worked at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia, and my husband worked there. So we got to be kind of reunited, and it was there that we started playing 2 piano and 4 hand, which was tremendous, tremendous fun. And I love sight reading with Tracy. So now that Tracy, you're in San Antonio, it's a very sad thing. But this is the next best thing, so you'll have to come on more and more so that we can keep doing this. All right, so the next piece on the program is one that Tracy found, and it's by, is it Ferdinand Ries?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And this is a set of variations called When Meteor Lights. I have no idea.
And then
anything
it's
about
German air, so it must be some, I don't know, based on a little German song.
Yeah. So what we're going to do, we're going to try this. We're going to do tag team variations. So Tracy is going to start with the theme and the first variation, and then we'll alternate from there on out. So we'll see how it goes, and we'll have fun with it.
It's in C major, so that we, at least I picked that. But I will say that looking ahead, it's a doozy in terms of little technical challenges, almost always for the right hand, but sometimes for the left as well. Very, very typical kind of classical period variation sets. You can see Erica's look of shock and awe as she looks ahead. But it's figuration and it's patterns, and it's the stuff that, that when you do a lot of sight reading, you're kind of used to. So we shall see how it goes, but it should be fun. So here's the theme and the first variation.
obviously at the ends of those variations at the beginning, I could not figure out the rhythm. Like, my brain did not compute.
Well, it's tricky too when they do, it's in 2/4, and then you get, as soon as you get 30 seconds, 30-second notes, it's like, oh. What do you call it in England? I don't remember. Semi.
And I was thinking while we were playing, Tracy, that you're like the queen of scales and arpeggios, and I am the polar opposite. So Tracy, even before the show, she was practicing her arpeggios, and I was not. And I was thinking, I should just let you do the whole thing. But anyway,
I'm kind of a glutton for punishment on stuff like that. But that was a little weird.
It was a little weird. Good. So before I continue with some music, Tracy, I would love to hear a little bit of your story about, how that relates to how does one get better at sight reading besides just learning, or if there's anything you could tell people about encouraging students to get better at sight reading, what would you say?
Well, I think, I always had a love of learning new music. So for me, that was always a joy. And my teacher was, when I had one teacher from the time I started until I graduated from high school, and she was very good about carefully leveling me up. And she also had entered me in Michigan. There was a very good system of achievement testing every year through the Michigan Music Teachers Association. And that achievement testing day had everything. It had sight reading, it had technique, it had scales and arpeggios, it had I can't even remember what else was involved in it besides repertoire. You had your prepared repertoire, and but sight reading was a part of it, so you actually practice and there's a written theory test, there was an ear training test, it was everything. And so I had a pretty thorough development in that by the time I got to high school. But the sight reading wasn't that challenging necessarily for each level, so it wasn't that big of a challenge maybe, but I did it all the way along. And then I started playing for church too, and when I was in high school. And when you do that, then you end up doing a fair amount of really quick learning because of playing hymns and things through the choir. So I was starting to get into a habit of that. But then my high school choir director, my freshman year of high school, I was in the band playing clarinet, and he found out that I was a pianist. I don't know the story behind how he found out or what the deal was. All I know is that he dragged me across the hall into the choir room and plopped me down on the piano and had me sight read with one of his choirs. And I think it was the select choir. And it was trial by fire, sitting me down in front of that group and having me sight read. But it was quite a thrill to do it and to make music with this group of people. And I was the sole instrumentalist with this group of singers, and it was such a thrill. And he had me start playing for choirs pretty regularly then, which was just a wonderful part of my development. So, but yeah, that was kind of talk about leveling up in a really fast way with the sight reading. So, yeah.
Well, and it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think so often with something like that, because sight reading is a daunting thing to do, especially in that situation. Mm-hmm. But I do think so often it's those moments that can also be transforming, mm-hmm. because you kind of fell in love, it sounds like, with being in that sort of situation. But in order to do that, you have to be a good sight reader. But I think, so I hope that more young students can get those opportunities, even if it's just every once in a while. But I think that can really open the door to people to realize, I want this. I want to get better at this. This is what I want to do.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
And it definitely takes a teacher, in that case a choir director, who is willing to train me and willing to work with me. Beyond that, the sight reading was kind of a trial by fire to see let's see how you do with this, but it turned into a lot more because his wife was a voice teacher, and so I would accompany her students for solo and ensemble. So it turned into a lot. It really turned into the beginning of my career path, very, very much. But it took me being prepared to do that, him giving me a piece that wasn't so far out of the realm of what I would be able to do, which was a guess on his part probably, and then me being brave enough to try it. So
Yeah, I think,
and that's what people need. But it's mostly the opportunities and teachers who are willing to work with young pianists and train them.
yeah, I agree. And I think what you said about the choir director also had to be somewhat ready to let go of maybe some expectations, and I think sometimes that can be a difficult position to be in, but it's also so crucial, you know.
It's kind of the biggest problem I see in the collaborative piano world today, which is that pianists, they spend gobs of time learning repertoire that's really, really difficult. They don't practice the sight reading skills along the way to be able to play things that are maybe a little bit easier than that, but to be able to quickly learn music. And then choir directors and other music directors expect a level of sight reading to which there aren't that many people that can really do it. And so then because it's not necessarily about sight reading, it's about being able to learn music quickly and being able to adapt in a situation with a director, with a conductor and all those kinds of things. And if you don't get training with that along the way, you can't just jump into it. And that's, what I think is the hardest thing about trying to get more pianists involved in collaborative work.
Right. Well, thank you for the part that you do in that, because I know, you're always keeping an eye out for students and helping them to develop their skills. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Great. And thank you for joining me and being brave yourself today. So, all right. Well, I think I'll say goodbye for now, but Tracy is going to hang on till the bitter end while I continue my reading fest here. So see you later, Tracy. All right. I haven't looked at the comments in a few minutes, so I'm going to check it out, see if there's any questions. Doesn't look like there's any questions. I do see that Inca Warrior joined us, so hello there. All right. The next piece on the program is a Nocturne by somebody I had not heard of. It's Leopoldine Blahetka, and this is Nocturne Opus 46, number 2. And as I open this up, it looks really, really daunting because there are all of these 64th notes, or I guess over in Europe it's hemi, demi, semi-quaver or something like that. I'm not quite sure which one that is. So let's see if I can figure this out. Obviously it's not going to be real fast. It's in 6/8 and it's in A minor, or no sharps and flats, so that's always good. Very arpeggio-y. See, Tracy should have done this one. So there's like an introduction, and then we get into an andantino, which has a really strange rhythm. Okay, so I got that. They're 30-second notes. The melody starts in the right hand in octaves, then it goes to the left hand. So, and then the left hand has the opposite hand has accompaniment figures. Oy, ay, ay. This will be very interesting. And then it ends the way it began, with sort of an improvisatory rhapsodic section. Oh my gosh. Okay. The notes are kind of small too, so this should be interesting. Okay. Tempo. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to figure out how this works. So here, each eighth note is divided into 6, and then it goes divided into 8. Is that consistent? Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, so just right before I started this, Tracy was saying it's good not to choose something that's a little bit beyond your level. I have no idea. I mean, that was beyond my level or something. I don't know. That's just really hard to read. But a really fun challenge to read. And again, Tracy should have done this one because of all the arpeggios. Sorry about that. But hopefully that was somewhat, you heard something in there of a melody. Oh my gosh, that was insane. Okay, moving on to something completely different. This actually started a Twitter conversation, this next piece last night, late at night. This is Jan Petersen Sweelinck's Fantasia. And there's a notation in here throughout that I had no idea what it was. It looks like a half note with 2 slashes through it. And I got lots of interesting answers about what people thought it meant. I think from looking at several sources that people sent my way about playing at that time period, it actually just means a trill, an extended trill. So that's what I'm gonna do. So this is in D minor, very, very early music. And because of time, I'm gonna go ahead and not do a lot of explaining, which will make some people happy, possibly. 16th notes primarily. We do have some 16th notes, 32nd notes. And they're quite runs. Then there's long sections without 16ths, so I don't think I want it to be too slow. Trying a couple different sections to latch onto a tempo. I think that's what I'm gonna go for. I may regret it, but if you don't live life without regret, what is life worth living? Something like that. So, oh, and then we have this element that it's actually written in, it's 3-2 or 4-2. challenges. So that was Jan Peterson's Sweelinck's Fantasia, and that was much longer than I thought it was going to be. So anyway, we're not going to be able to do the last two pieces I had put down, which are by Meteor. So we'll have to bump that to next week. But I want to welcome Tracy back on here. If she can come back on. I have to go to the right screen. There she is. That was crazy.
Yeah.
I should have just had you read all of it today.
Definitely not.
Anyway, so Tracy, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And anytime you want to sight read on the show, just let me know. And yeah, so everybody, thank you for joining. We'll have a good time next week. We'll do some Meteor and whatever else you send my way. So do send me requests throughout the week. Again, the show is filling up really quickly every week. So please do go ahead and send me your requests as soon as possible. Kind of Wednesday or Thursday is a great day.